There is a particular arrogance in the way we talk about the natural world. We look at the animals alive today and we treat them as the point of the story, the final version, the thing that evolution was working toward all along. We look at Australia and we see kangaroos and koalas and the occasional saltwater crocodile, and we think we understand what this continent is. We do not. The Australia that exists today is a pale, diminished echo of what was here before the extinctions, before the reshaping, before the cascade of losses that stripped this continent of the animals that had, for millions of years, been its true rulers. And the word ruler is not metaphor. Each creature on this list dominated its environment so completely, shaped the behavior of so many other species so thoroughly, and held its ecological position for so long that its absence is still felt in the landscape today. In the plants that flower without pollinators, in the prey animals that flee from predators that no longer exist, in the silences where something enormous used to move. What I want you to understand before we begin is that these animals were not freaks. They were not evolutionary dead ends. They were the products of millions of years of refinement, shaped by the specific pressures of a continent unlike any other on Earth. And they ruled here for spans of time that make human civilization look like an afterthought. Some of them were alive when the first humans arrived. Some of them looked those humans in the eye, and some of them did not survive the encounter. Number 10. Coelacanthropus, the hot cross-bun monster of the Cretaceous. Before we reach the megafauna that most people associate with prehistoric Australia, we need to go much further back, into the Cretaceous period, into a time when Australia was still attached to Antarctica, and the world was warm enough that there were no permanent polar ice caps. From the Lightning Ridge opal fields of New South Wales, miners working through the opalized sediments of the Gryman Creek Formation have, over the decades, turned up fragments of ancient bone and teeth that have found their way into scientific hands with world-altering consequences. Among the strangest of these fossils are the teeth of a creature described in 1997 by researchers Michael Archer, Timothy Flannery, and colleagues from the Australian Museum, a mammal so anatomically peculiar that the team nicknamed it informally the hot cross-bun monster, because the cross-shaped ridges on its molar teeth resembled nothing seen in any other mammal, living or fossil. Coelacanthropus was a monotreme, a member of the same ancient lineage that produced the platypus and the echidna, and it represents a branch of mammalian evolution so different from anything that survived into the modern world that its discovery genuinely expanded the known range of mammalian anatomical possibility. It lived during a period when Australia was still a cold, forested, high-latitude continent receiving months of polar darkness each year, and the mammals that inhabited it had evolved physiological and behavioral adaptations to those conditions that left traces in the biology of their descendants alive today. Coelacanthropus did not rule through size or aggression. It ruled through duration and through the sheer improbability of its survival on a continent that was, for much of the Cretaceous, one of the harshest environments on Earth for warm-blooded animals. Understanding that Australia's mammalian lineages stretch back to the age of dinosaurs, that the monotremes alive today are the last survivors of a radiation that was already ancient when Tyrannosaurus rex was alive, changes the way you think about what it means to be a native Australian animal. Number 9. Paracyclotosaurus, Davigi, the armored titan of the Triassic swamps. 240 million years ago, long before the first dinosaur had evolved, long before the first mammal had drawn breath, the rivers and swamps of what would become Eastern Australia were patrolled by one of the largest amphibians that has ever existed on this planet. Paracyclotaurus davidi was a temnospondyl, a member of an ancient group of amphibians that dominated freshwater ecosystems across the globe during the Triassic period, and the Australian species was among the biggest of them all, reaching lengths of up to 2.5 meters, with a skull nearly a meter long, broad and flat like a living shovel, lined with interlocking teeth that could seize and hold prey of substantial size. The fossils of Paracyclotaurus were found in the Ipswich coal measures of Queensland and described in detail by researchers at the Australian Museum, contributing to a global understanding of temnospondyl diversity that has been built up over more than a century of paleontological work. This animal lay in the shallows of Triassic rivers and waited with the patience of a creature whose metabolic demands were low enough to make patience a viable ecological strategy. It ruled the freshwater ecosystems of its time, not because it was the fastest or the most agile predator, but because it was the largest, because nothing in its environment was equipped to challenge it, and because the rivers and swamps it inhabited gave it everything it needed in such abundance that it persisted, with relatively little change, across millions of years of geological time. The temnospondyls, as a group, survived the Permian-Triassic mass extinction, the largest extinction event in Earth's history, and some lineages persisted into the Cretaceous. Their durability is itself a kind of power. The power of bodies so well suited to their environment that catastrophe after catastrophe could not erase them. Number 8. Steropodon, Galmani, the platypus that hunted in the dark. At the same lightning ridge fossil site that produced Colocodon, another fragment of open-eyes jawbone yielded one of the most significant mammal fossils ever found in Australia. Steropodon galmani, described in 1985 by Michael Archer and colleagues at the Australian Museum, was a Cretaceous monotreme, approximately the size of a platypus, but with a dentition far more robust, featuring large, complex molars, capable of crushing hard-shelled invertebrates or small vertebrate prey. It lived approximately 110 million years ago in the rivers and wetlands of Cretaceous Australia, navigating a world of giant amphibians, early dinosaurs, and freshwater ecosystems of extraordinary complexity. What makes Steropodon genuinely remarkable is what it tells us about the longevity and resilience of the monotreme lineage. The platypus, alive today in Australian rivers, is not a primitive leftover. It is the current version of a lineage that has been refining its extraordinary sensory and physiological toolkit for over 110 million years. Longer than the entire evolutionary history of the placental mammals that dominate every other continent on Earth. Steropodon was small by the standards of the animals it shared its world with. But small does not mean insignificant. In the ecological mathematics of a freshwater system, a predator that can detect electrical fields generated by the muscle contractions of its prey, that can navigate in total darkness by touch and electroreception, that produces venom capable of incapacitating animals larger than itself, is not small at all. It is precisely calibrated, and that precision, that extraordinary fit between an animal and its environment, is a form of dominance that outlasts every dinosaur that ever walked the Australian landscape. Number 7. Nimbodon, Lavericorum, the tree bear that weighed as much as a man. When we think of prehistoric megafauna, we tend to think of ground-dwelling giants. What we rarely consider is the canopy, the upper levels of the forest where, in prehistoric Australia, animals of substantial size were performing ecological roles that nothing alive today can replicate. Nimbodon lavericorum was a large diprotid dontoid marsupial, described from extraordinary fossil material recovered from a cave system called AL90 in the Riverslough World Heritage Fossil Site in northwestern Queensland, where the work of Michael Archer and Suzanne Hand at the University of New South Wales has produced one of the richest windows into Miocene Australian ecosystems anywhere on Earth. Nimbodon lived approximately 15 million years ago and weighed approximately 70 kilograms, making it the largest known arboreal marsupial ever to have existed. Its limb proportions, particularly the long, grasping forearms and the specialized hip joint structure, analyzed by researchers, including Karen Black at the University of New South Wales, indicate an animal that spent substantial time in the trees, moving through the forest canopy with the deliberate, powerful locomotion of a large primate, rather than the quick, light agility of a possum. In the dense forests of Miocene Australia, Nimbodon occupied an ecological role that has no modern equivalent, a large-bodied canopy herbivore reshaping the upper structure of the forest through its feeding, creating openings in the canopy, dispersing seeds through its gut at height, and providing a prey resource for predators capable of reaching it in the trees. When it and its relatives disappeared, the forest canopy of Australia lost a class of ecological engineer that had been operating there for millions of years. The forests that grew in the absence of large, arboreal herbivores were structurally different from the forests those animals had shaped, and some researchers have suggested that the characteristic density and impenetrability of certain Australian rainforest understories today may partly reflect the ecological legacy of that ancient loss. Number 6. Euschambersia, and the venomous reptile lineage that reached Australia. Among the most contested and scientifically fascinating questions in Australian paleontology is the origin and diversity of venom systems in the continent's reptile fauna. Australia today is home to more species of venomous snake than any other continent, and the venom systems of Australian elapids, the family that includes taipans, brown snakes, and tiger snakes, represent some of the most biochemically sophisticated toxin delivery systems in the natural world. The evolutionary history of these venom systems reaches back through millions of years of Australian snake evolution, but the deeper roots of reptilian venom on this continent trace to lineages far more ancient. Research by Brian Fry at the University of Queensland, published in landmark papers in Nature and other journals, has established that venom systems in reptiles are far more ancient and far more widespread than previously assumed, with the evolutionary origins of reptilian venom traceable to the Triassic period or earlier. The Australian fossil record contains representatives of ancient venomous reptile lineages whose descendants include the taipan, whose venom is among the most acutely toxic substances produced by any living organism, capable of killing an adult human through the disruption of coagulation cascades within hours of a significant event. The inland taipan, Oxyranus microlepidotus, described from specimens in the Channel Country of Queensland and South Australia, and analysed by toxicologists, including David Worrell at the University of Oxford, produces a venom so potent that the median lethal dose in laboratory assays is lower than that of any other snake species ever tested. This animal is not a monster. It is the current endpoint of a refinement process that began before the Australian continent separated from Gondwana, a lineage that has been perfecting its biochemical arsenal on this isolated continent for tens of millions of years, without the evolutionary pressure of large mammalian competitors that might have driven its venom in different directions. Number 5. Obdurodon theralcuschilde, the giant platypus with functional teeth. In 2013, a research team led by Rebecca Pian at Columbia University, and including Michael Archer and Suzanne Hand from the University of New South Wales, published the description of a platypus tooth recovered from the River Slough fossil site in Queensland that was unlike anything seen in modern platypuses. The tooth belonged to a species named Obdurodon theralcuschilde, and it was large, approximately twice the size of any previously known fossil platypus tooth, indicating an animal substantially larger than the modern platypus, and equipped with functional teeth that a modern platypus conspicuously lacks. Modern platypuses lose their teeth as juveniles, and replace them with keratinous pads used for processing prey. Obdurodon retained functional teeth into adulthood, giving it a mechanical prey processing capability that the modern species does not possess, and its size, estimated at roughly twice the length of a modern platypus, would have placed it in competition with crocodilians and large fish as a predator in the freshwater ecosystems of Miocene Australia. The River Slough fossil site, inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List in 1994, and representing one of the most significant windows into Cenozoic Australian mammal evolution in the world, has produced evidence of an ecosystem so rich in monotreme and marsupial diversity that the modern Australian mammal fauna, already extraordinary by global standards, appears impoverished by comparison. Obdurodon is not the most dramatic animal on this list, but it illustrates, with unusual clarity, the general principle that the Australian animals we know today are survivors of a much larger and more diverse community, reduced versions of a world that was, in almost every dimension, larger and stranger and more biologically inventive than anything that remains. Number 4. Zaglusis huckati, the giant echidna that roamed the plains. The echidna alive in Australia today is a small, spiny insectivore of modest size and inoffensive temperament, beloved by naturalists for its extraordinary physiology, but not a creature that inspires the kind of instinctive alertness that large predators produce. Its prehistoric relatives inspired something different. Zaglusis huckati, described from fossil material found in Western Australia and analyzed by researchers, including Timothy Flannery, was a giant echidna that stood approximately a meter tall at the shoulder and weighed an estimated 30 kilograms, roughly 10 times the mass of a modern short-beaked echidna. It lived until approximately 46,000 years ago, placing it firmly within the period of human occupation of the continent, and its extinction followed the same compressed timeline as the other megafauna losses of the late Pleistocene. Zaglusis huckati was almost certainly not a predator. Like its living relatives, it was probably a specialist feeder on soil invertebrates, earthworms, and insect larvae. But at its scale, it would have been processing soil at a rate and depth that constituted genuine ecosystem engineering. Large animals that dig are among the most important ecological actors in any system, aerating soil, redistributing nutrients, creating microhabitats for dozens of other species in the disturbance zones their foraging produces. A giant echidna moving across the Australian landscape would have been doing to the soil what Diprotodon was doing to the vegetation above it, structuring the environment through the cumulative physical impact of its feeding. Its disappearance from the Australian ecosystem removed a class of soil engineering that nothing has replaced, and some researchers studying soil invertebrate diversity in different regions of Australia have speculated about the long-term consequences of losing an animal that was, in effect, a living plow operating continuously across the continent for millions of years. Number 3. Maialenia platyceps, the horned turtle that outlasted the Ice Age. In the fossil record of Australia and the southwestern Pacific, there is a group of animals so improbable in their combination of features that their first describers struggled to place them within any familiar taxonomic framework. The Maialoni turtles were large, fully terrestrial tortoises equipped with armored tails, studded with bony rings and spikes, and in the case of Maialenia, platyceps skulls, bearing elaborate bony horns that gave the head a silhouette more reminiscent of a horned dinosaur than of any turtle alive today. The Australian species, and its close relatives, described from fossil material from Queensland and Lord Howe Island, with key analytical work by Eugene Gaffney at the American Museum of Natural History, reached shell lengths of approximately a meter and total body masses that made them the dominant large herbivores in the island and coastal environments they inhabited. Mealania survived in Australia until roughly 50,000 years ago and persisted on Pacific islands associated with human colonization until as recently as 2002, 3,000 years ago, with the timing of its Pacific extinction closely tracking the arrival of humans on each island in a pattern documented by researchers, including Trevor Worthy at Flinders University. This pattern, an animal that survives for millions of years until humans arrive and then disappears within a few generations, is one of the clearest signals in the prehistoric record of the direct role of human hunting in megafauna extinction. Mealania was large, slow, apparently without behavioral defenses against a bipedal predator, using coordinated hunting strategies, and nutritionally valuable enough to represent a significant food resource for small human populations. It was, in the assessment of the researchers who have studied its extinction pattern most carefully, not a species that failed. It was a species that was removed. Number 2. Mucoperna nambensis, the forgotten giant of the Oligocene. Science moves faster than most people realize, and some of the most important prehistoric Australian animals have been described so recently that they have barely had time to enter public awareness. Mucoperna nambensis was formally described in 2020 by a research team, including Robin Beck at the University of Salford and Mike Archer at the University of New South Wales, based on fossil material that had been sitting in museum collections since its excavation from the Ngama local fauna deposits of South Australia in the 1970s. The delay between excavation and description is not unusual in paleontology, where material often waits decades for a researcher with the specific expertise to interpret it correctly. What Mucoperna turned out to be was extraordinary. It was a marsupial of the Oligocene, living approximately 25 million years ago, that represented an entirely new family with no previously recognized relatives, a lineage that appears to be among the most ancient branches of the wombat koala evolutionary tree, and an animal that at its estimated body mass of up to 50 kilograms was 5 times larger than any wombat alive today. Mucoperna's description added a new chapter to the evolutionary history of Australian marsupials, demonstrating that the large-bodied herbivore niche in Australian ecosystems has been occupied by a succession of different marsupial lineages across tens of millions of years, each one eventually disappearing and being replaced by a different evolutionary solution to the same ecological problem. The fact that a completely unknown family of large marsupials was sitting undescribed in museum collections until 2020 should give everyone pause. It is a reminder that the prehistory of this continent is not a solved problem. It is an ongoing investigation, and the investigators are still finding things that no one expected. Number 1. Yurlunga, and the myth that was also a memory. The number 1 position on this list belongs to an animal that bridges 2 ways of knowing, the scientific and the traditional, in a way that tells us something important about both. Yurlunga is a name from the ceremonial traditions of Aboriginal Australian communities, particularly Yolngu communities of Arnhem Land, where it refers to a great serpent of cosmological significance, a being of enormous creative and destructive power associated with water, with the rainbow, and with the primal ordering of the world. It is one of the most widely distributed mythological figures in Aboriginal Australian traditions, appearing in various forms across communities separated by thousands of kilometers. It is also, according to research published by John Scanlon in the Alsaringa Journal and subsequent work examining the Madsoid fossil record of Australia, the possible cultural memory of a real animal. Yurlunga camfieldsensis was a giant Madsoid snake of the Miocene, described from fossil material from the Northern Territory and representing a species potentially reaching 6 to 7 meters in length, living in the freshwater lake systems of central and northern Australia during a period when those systems were far more extensive than they are today. Whether the Yurlunga of ceremony is a direct cultural memory of the Yurlunga of paleontology is not established science. The researchers who have examined the correspondence are careful to note that the connection is suggestive rather than proven, but the extraordinary geographic range of the rainbow serpent tradition, its consistent association with water bodies, and with serpentine water-shaped landscape features, and the biological reality of large water-associated snakes in Australia's deep past, create a convergence that is genuinely difficult to dismiss. What it suggests, if it is real, is something almost incomprehensible. A cultural memory encoded in ceremony and transmitted across generations, preserving not just the fact that enormous snakes once existed in Australian waterways, but encoding that knowledge into the foundational mythological framework of a civilization. making it impossible to forget because forgetting it would mean losing the ceremony that organized your world. The animal became a god, and through that transformation, it survived in human memory for millions of years after its bones turned to stone. That is a different kind of dominance than teeth and size and predatory efficiency. It is the dominance of an idea, and in the long run, ideas outlast everything. Every animal on this list ruled something real. A river system, a forest canopy, a stretch of open plains, a freshwater ecosystem that no longer exists. And every one of them, from the Cretaceous monotremes to the Pleistocene giants, was shaped by the specific, extraordinary, isolated conditions of a continent that evolved its biology in ways that no other place on Earth has replicated. The animals alive in Australia today, the ones that survived, are not the successors of these rulers. They are the remnants, the fraction that made it through a series of catastrophes that most life on this continent did not survive. Understanding that changes everything about how you look at a kangaroo or a platypus or an echidna moving through the Australian bush. You are not looking at ordinary animals in an ordinary landscape. You are looking at survivors in a world still haunted by the rulers it lost. If this kind of deep history reaches something in you, stay close. There is always more to find.